At 12:47 in the morning of July 4, 2025, the Dutch parliament voted to abolish its own asylum system, not suspend it, not reform it, abolish it. Permanent residence permits, gone. Family reunification, restricted to married partners and children under 18. The right to stay in the Netherlands, reduced to a 3-year renewable permit that the state can simply choose not to renew. The minister who signed it called it the strictest asylum law ever passed in the Netherlands. She was Geert Wilders' own appointee, Visa Verge. 3 weeks later, Wilders brought down the government that passed it. 7 months after that midnight vote, the man who replaced that government stood in front of cameras and declared that liberalism had won, that the Netherlands had rejected the far right, that populism could be beaten. Rob Jetten, youngest prime minister in Dutch history, first openly gay leader of any EU nation, had campaigned on tolerance, collaboration, and a return to Dutch progressive values. He also pledged to process all asylum claims outside EU territory entirely. Euronews. This is what winning looks like in the Netherlands in April 2026, and it tells you everything about where Europe is heading. To understand how this happened, you need to understand the speed of the collapse. In November 2023, Wilders' PV5 won 37 seats, more than doubling its previous result, in an election driven by record immigration levels and widespread perception of strained public services. Grokopedia, the mainstream parties who had spent years refusing to work with him, put him in government anyway. The deal was simple: the strictest asylum policy in Europe. A cap of 3,500 asylum applications per year. Closed borders, mass deportations. The coalition called it hope, courage, and pride. It lasted 11 months. In June 2025, Wilders pulled his own party out, saying it was moving too slowly. "I signed up for the strictest asylum policy," he told reporters, "not for the downfall of the Netherlands." The irony was surgical. The man who had spent 20 years demanding the hardest immigration crackdown in Dutch history torpedoed the only government that had ever given him the power to deliver it. Because it was not hard enough, fast enough. But before it fell, it had already done something permanent. On July 4, 2025, the Asylum Emergency Measures Act passed at 12:47 in the morning. Permanent residence abolished. Family reunification gutted. An EU asylum opt-out formally requested, a demand that the Netherlands be allowed to set its own rules entirely outside the common European framework. Visa Verge. The law survived. The government didn't. And that distinction matters more than any election result. On October 29, 2025, D66 and PVV each won 26 seats. The margin between them, fewer than 28,000 votes in a country of 18 million. Rob Jetten declared it a victory for liberalism. The international press agreed. Headlines said the pendulum had swung back. The Dutch had rejected Wilders. The center had held. But look beneath the surface and the story inverts completely. The far right combined now holds 42 seats in the Dutch parliament, up from 28 in 2021. The trend line is one of steady, uninterrupted growth. Center for European Reform Wilders lost ground because every other major party had already moved onto his terrain, not as a tactical concession, as a structural convergence. D66's own September 2025 policy paper stated, "The Netherlands is a country with liberal values. Those who do not respect those values lose their rights." Jetten promised to make the asylum system fast, strict, and fair, and proposed processing all asylum claims in migrants' countries of origin outside EU territory entirely. Persuasion. This is not a moderate position. Processing claims outside the EU is a policy that human rights organizations describe as legally incompatible with the 1951 Refugee Convention. It is, word for word, a version of what the UK attempted with Rwanda, and what the European Court of Human Rights blocked. Jetten is proposing it from the center-left. The Dutch Bar Association found that 12 of the 15 main Dutch political parties were making promises that violated international law, including the parties running against Wilders, including the party that won. This is what AXIAL calls the fortress consensus. not a pendulum swinging back, not a victory of liberalism over populism. A convergence of the entire political spectrum onto the same destination, with different aesthetics and the same arithmetic. The debate in the Netherlands is no longer whether to restrict immigration. The debate is how fast, how hard, and who pays the political price for saying so out loud. And the answer, in April 2026, is everyone, all at once, from opposite ends of the political spectrum, arriving at the same wall. But here's the variable that the political debate refuses to connect. And it is the one that makes the Fortress Consensus structurally impossible to sustain over the next decade. The Netherlands has 410,000 missing homes. The construction sector needs 94,000 new workers over the next 5 years to build them. Those workers do not exist in the domestic labor pool. They will have to come from abroad, from exactly the same migration stream the government is tightening. This is not a projection. This is the calculation of the Economic Institute for Construction, published and cited by the Dutch government's own housing ministry. The pipes cannot be laid, the foundations cannot be poured, the cranes cannot be staffed, without the labor that the Fortress Consensus is making harder to access. Go to Rotterdam. The largest port in Europe, handling 40% of all goods entering the continent, is built on a workforce that is 40% foreign-born. Automation is advancing, but the transition requires engineers, technicians, and logistics specialists that the Netherlands does not produce in sufficient numbers domestically. The hydrogen terminals being built right now on the Maasvlakte, Europe's energy future, by the Port Authority's own description, are being constructed by workers who arrived under exactly the visa categories the new government is tightening. Go to the hospitals. Since last year, the Netherlands has more residents over 65 than under 20. The first time in Dutch recorded history. NL Times. The healthcare system serving that aging population relies on international medical recruitment at every level, from nurses to specialists. The waiting lists for GP appointments in the Randstad are already running at several weeks. Without continued international recruitment, they will extend to months. And go to the farms. The agricultural sector, the same sector that brought down one government over nitrogen regulations and reshaped Dutch electoral politics through the farmer-citizen movement, employs hundreds of thousands of seasonal workers from Eastern Europe, from Asia, from North Africa. The food system that makes the Netherlands the second largest agricultural exporter in the world runs on migration. The farmers who marched on The Hague to protect their land and their industry are economically dependent on the labor flows their political allies are restricting. The Dutch population grows entirely through immigration. Natural growth has stopped. More people are dying than being born. NL Times. The demographic foundation that funds the pension system, staffs the hospitals, builds the homes, and runs the port is being squeezed from both ends. Fewer births, more deaths, and a political consensus that is tightening the valve on the only source of demographic replenishment the country has left. The Jetten cabinet, sworn in on February 23, 2026, holds only 66 of 150 parliamentary seats. It is the weakest parliamentary foundation of any Dutch government in modern history. Every piece of legislation requires negotiation with opposition parties who have their own immigration positions, often harder than the coalitions. The Asylum Emergency Measures Act is still before the Senate. As of April 2026, it is not clear whether all the laws will pass. The June 12th deadline, when new EU-wide asylum rules come into force simultaneously, adds a second layer of legal complexity that no minority government can resolve through parliamentary arithmetic alone. The housing shortage is the #1 issue in Dutch public life. Not asylum, not wilders, not nitrogen, housing. Because the queue for social housing in Amsterdam is 8 years. Because the average Dutch home now costs 502,000 euros. 5 times what it cost in 1995, while incomes only doubled in the same period. Taylor and Francis Online. Because a quarter of renters spend more than 40% of their income on housing costs. And because, in the public perception, right or wrong, housing and immigration have fused into a single political question that no policy paper, no parliamentary debate, and no prime ministerial speech can separate. In the October 2025 election, both were the dominant issues, not because politicians made them the same issue, because voters already had. In April 2026, it is betting its future on a fortress consensus that every party supports and no party can fully implement. Because the mathematics of space, labor, and demography do not respond to parliamentary votes, the youngest prime minister in Dutch history standing in front of cameras explaining why processing asylum claims outside the EU is actually the humane option. The fracture is not a warning, it is the operating system. And the rest of Europe is not watching to see what happens next. It is taking notes on how to replicate it. Logistics secure the future. Mathematics secure the power. Analysis terminated.